Urban Faith family, hey, how are you guys doing? Good afternoon, good morning, wherever you're watching this. I have the privilege of being with someone who I think is an incredible just person. And I'm gonna say his first name, and I'm gonna let him say his last name because you got a name like mine, as you guys know, you don't want to mess anything up. And so I'm here with Compassion International's CEO, president, the guy who leads the organization, Jimmy
Mellado.
Man, I would have never gotten that right.
Well, if we wanted to really be technical, the real name is Santiago Heriberto Mellado.
Whoa.
But Jimmy's good.
Jimmy, I got to tell you, I've been waiting this conversation for a long time. You ask any of my friends, and they will tell you, I love what you guys do. And so I've got to ask, how did you get involved in all of this? And what do you love about what you get the privilege of doing?
Man? I just had a conversation last night with my mom, 88 years old.
Wow.
And she grew up in poverty, knows what it's like. As a kid, she would tell us what it was like to grow up with a dirt floor. And she was taught how to keep a dirt floor clean and level. Interesting that she would describe it that way. So she grew up in poverty, but boy, did God put an adventuresome heart in her. And she met another young man who also had an adventuresome heart. They're on the border of Mexico and United States. And boy, they got married. And in 63 years of marriage, they have moved 41 times.
Wow.
So, and most of that outside the United States. So I was born in El Salvador, in the jungles there, and no doctor, natural birth, and 8 different schools before graduating high school, almost 20 different homes growing up. I thought it was normal that every family moved every year. Seriously, I thought that, of course, every family moves every year, only to marry someone that one house her whole life.
Wow.
But I would say that mostly growing up in the developing world, and my father was an engineer building projects in places that needed electricity. I remember going to Bolivia, no electricity 24/7. His project was to bring electricity to that city of Santa Cruz there, and so they could have it 24/7. No TVs, stuff like that, and yet there was something in my mother's heart that always had us involved in the life of the poor. Sometimes we would pick our church to be in the worst part of the neighborhood because that's where the poor were, and that's where we would go to church. And it was nothing like noble in her mind to do that. It was just natural. It was just the normal thing that a Jesus follower does. They live where the need is. And so I remember at times, in fact, last night she said, do you remember a time in Peru? We were visiting Peru, and we were walking down the street, and this little kid came up to you and asked for money. And you came and you got money from us and gave it to him. But once you do that with one child, then another one and another one and another one. So sooner or later, there was a whole crowd of kids, that we were trying to help in that situation. And then there was something profound. I'm probably at this point 6 years of age, and I'll never forget a man who had no legs below his knees, had rubber things wrapped around his nubs, and he was an old man, rugged face, and he scared me. He looked scary to a little 6-year-old kid, and he grabbed me like that, and he's begging me for money. Now this is an adult asking a 6-year-old for money. And it did something inside of me. There was something about that I said, whatever landed him in this situation, that he would ask a 6-year-old for money, we got to take care of those things. And so I had hundreds of experiences like that growing up in the different cultures, and little did I know that would be training for what I'm doing now. And my mom was able to attend the service where the former president kind of officially passed the baton to me. And my mom came up to me afterwards, stood in front of me, didn't say a word, and she's just looking at me. And I'm like, okay, she's about to say something. What do you want to say? She says nothing. She gives me a hug, she pulls back, still can't say a word, hugs me again, pulls back. Now tears are starting to come down her eyes. And she hugs me again, quickly whispers in my ear, hablemos más tarde, which means we'll talk later. So I came to her the next day and I said, Mom, what was going on there that you stood in front of me, couldn't get a word out? And she said, as I was watching you enter into this ministry, a thought came to mind. And this was the thought. when someone grows up in poverty, they never think it'll be a benefit to their children.
Wow.
Because you're wanting your child to get out of poverty,
That's
to be
deep.
released from poverty. And yet I could see how me growing up in poverty put some DNA in the heart of her son that has now become central to his life calling. And so I can tell you, being at Compassion, getting to do what I do, for me, is the most congruent thing in my soul for me to be doing. Because I feel like the Lord has called me to be a bridge between the church of my youth in all those countries. And we serve in many of the countries where I grew up. I love going back to and trying to find my old house. But then as an adult, I've been serving the church and church leaders for now, next year will be the 30th year of serving church leaders, mostly in the well-resource world. And now at Compassion, the Lord is calling me to be a part of building a bigger bridge between the under and the well-resourced church.
Wow. I got to tell you, I'm a big fan of you guys. And at one time, and I came here with a mission in mind also, wanted to get to know you better, but also I want to encourage everyone to sponsor a Compassion National Child. And so my wife reminded me last night as we were getting ready for our time together here. She goes, we used to sponsor one a long time ago. She goes, so you can't tell everyone else to get in here if we're not getting in here. And so I said, you know what, as we're going to sponsor one.
Wow.
So we're in. And I hope you are too. But can you tell us, why should someone do that? And I think it's so, and that the culture we're in today, man, everyone should do it.
Yeah. If you believe in the Great Commandment, if you believe in the Great Commission, you want to sponsor a child, because that's what it's about. It looks like child sponsorship, but let me tell you what's behind the child sponsorship. It really is a church equipping ministry. Compassion is a church equipping ministry because they take the resources of the sponsorship and they invest them in the local church. That local church, so that it will do what a local church does when it's working right. It meets the needs of the marginalized. It goes where there's suffering and pain, and it extends the kingdom of heaven to them. And so, in a very practical way, this is what's happening when you sponsor a child. In a very practical way, you are providing that child with 4,000 hours of contact time, discipleship time with loving caregivers and tutors and worship leaders and teachers and cooks, volunteers. 4,000 hours of investment in that child's life during their most at-risk years of their life. That, in a very practical sense, is what the sponsorship is providing. That particular child that you are sponsoring, you're saying, we're going to equip the church that's nearest them to love on that child.
Wow.
To be there, to watch them grow up and step into their full God-given potential. And the program would fund anything that is preventing that child or young person from realizing their full God-given potential. It's discipleship.
It is. And it's one of the best programs, but also Compassion National is one of the best charities in the country. I mean, Forbes magazine ranks you guys number 8 in the country, man, which is a huge weight to bear here. So I got to ask you this question, Jimmy. What's it like leading this every day, man? What's it like seeing the church get involved in lives like the people who I'm asking you to get involved in?
Well, it's unbelievably significant because when I go to our front line of poverty, where our churches are serving so faithfully, I am blown away what is happening, the impact of what is occurring. And we've had outside independent research from the University of San Francisco who came into the ministry and said, would you let us study your children, now adults, to see if it made any difference? Independent study. So it went all the way up to our board, had to decide, are we going to let an independent group and come and look, like, what if they say,
underneath the hood here. Yeah.
What if there isn't a difference that's being made? And here's what they said. If we're not making a difference, we should know. There's a lot of resources and effort are going into this. So if we're not making a difference, we should know. So they did a 6-year longitudinal study, 10,000 kids, 2,000 in the program, compared them to 8,000 in the program, but in as same a situation in life as close as possible to the 2,000 kids that were in the program to isolate the impact of the program. What they found was there was a greater percentage and probability that they would be filled with hope. that they would know Jesus, that they would be involved in church leadership, that they would be involved in just civic leadership, that they would be teachers, that they would be involved in white-collar jobs, that they would be involved in salary jobs, being able to sustain their families. So it actually works. Like investing in the holistic development of a child through a local church actually works.
It does work.
Yeah.
Which is amazing to me just overall. What do you say to someone who may be watching this and they may be going, we have so many needs here in America. Man, why should we give to someone that we may or may not meet, which one of the cool things about compassion is you do get to meet the child you're sponsoring if you'd like to in most parts of the world anyway. Why should they do that?
Well, I go right to scripture on that one, where it talks about starting in Jerusalem, Judea and Samaria and the uttermost parts of the world. I think a church, when it's working right, a Jesus follower, when they're living their life, they are meeting the needs as God would lead them around them and beyond them. That I think the balance of that, there must be ministries that are ministering to the need, to the marginalized, the oppressed around you, but also beyond you. It is a both and. Yeah. There's no doubt. It's not one or the other. I love some churches. There's a church in Florida, one up in Ohio. They have a phenomenal commitment to children who are at risk. And so they're deeply involved in the foster system in their local city, deeply involved in adoption in their local city and state, in their community. And they're deeply involved with sponsorships all around the world, serving children that are marginalized there as well. It's that kind of beautiful balance of from Jerusalem to the uttermost parts of the world that I think is a healthy place for a Jesus follower or a collection of Jesus followers, a church, to be.
Gotcha. Next to last question, man, and I cannot believe we're almost at the end here. What does Compassion International do for the local church? We're in a place here in the Atlanta, Georgia area. Here, by the way, filming this today because you're here in town, which is great. So I said we got to grab Jimmy here. And the church that we're in, they sponsor 1,000 kids. In fact, what happens to a church that gets all in on that?
Let me give you a story of a real church. This church is literally a half a kilometer from where I lived as a third grader in Nicaragua, in Managua, Nicaragua. There was not a church there when I was living there at that time. There is one now. It was a little over 10 years ago. Compassion worked with a planting organization and planted a church there, just had 60-some people. A small church in a poverty community with 67 people, and they started serving 150 children, almost twice the number that went to the church. And through the Compassion program, a level of resources got invested in that church. Now imagine the tithes and offerings of 67 people, the resources to care for 150. That's a lot of resources. It dwarfed the church's budget. It's like over 90% of the resources coming into that church were coming through the Compassion program for the children at risk in their community. Now, fast forward a decade later. This is going to get at the answer to your question. A decade later, that church is running close to 500 people in an impoverished community. They are now sponsoring and supporting 350 children, and the Compassion resources are less than 50% of the overall resources of that church. Now, what's happening? They grew stewards. They grew tithers. They grew people that are now investing in that local church because it's not our ministry, it's their ministry. We get behind them and serve the vision and the mission that God has given them. And that church now is serving 30% of the entire community within walking distance of that church. See, now that's a church equipping. And from the very time we start a relationship with the church, we begin to cast vision for someday there will be a graduation day. We will not end our relationship, but there will be a graduation day where you have fully taken ownership of serving the kids in that community. I'll give you another example. This is a church my parents used to go to 30 years ago in Cochabamba, Bolivia. At that time, they were a Compassion church. The center of Cochabamba was where the poverty was. Years later, the Quechua Indians from the mountains were coming and they were squatting on the outskirts of Cochabamba, and that was now the real source of poverty as the inner city developed. So what did that church do? We have to be there. So they planted a church in the squatters' village, and they said, let's move the resource-heavy program of Compassion out there. But we don't want to stop serving the 200 and some kids downtown, So they became an Awana church. They continue investing in the spiritual development of the kids, but their education and resource needs are being served another way. And the Heavy Compassion program now is in their church plant that's in the squatters village. And the cycle continues.
Wow. That's amazing right there. How many churches in the States are part of Compassion International? Is there a number yet? And I know I'm putting you on the spot on this one, Jimmy. What is the number? And I know it always changes. What's the number today?
Well, we've got about 1.5 million individual supporters, and the vast majority of them are Jesus followers, so they go to church. So when you ask a church relationship, I'm going to say I'm not going to count all those churches. That's a lot. But churches that we actually have a more intentional, focused, and formal relationship with, where it's a long-term relationship, we're walking with that church to help them increase the heart of generosity in their congregation locally and globally. We have about 10,000 of those relationships in the United States.
That's a lot of churches, by the way. This is why I think everyone needs to get in on this one.
But I want to say one thing from a previous question. You talked about the scale of compassion, number 8 on Forbes' list. And I don't look at it that way, actually. I actually think compassion is more like a mom and pop garage operation. And here's why I say that. I don't compare it to other not-for-profit organizations. I compare it to the scale of the need, the scale of the opportunity.
Yeah.
And the reality is, I live daily with the fact that there's 170 million children living on less than $3.20 a day today in the countries where we are serving. It's more around the world, but just in the countries where we serve.
Those numbers are huge.
170 million children living on less than $3.20 a day in the program countries, 26 countries where we're active today. And I celebrate every one of the 2.2 million children that we're serving today, and it's 1.3% of the need. And right now, we say no 4 out of 5 times to every church that has come to us and said, oh, I see what's going on in Compassion and that partnership over there. Can you bring that here? They have raised their hand. We know who they are. We know where they are. And the reason we have to say not yet is because of the resource side of the equation. Our reach could be 4 to 5 times it is now if we were able to say yes to those existing churches that have already said they want to work with us. And yet I know the resources are here. They really are.
They really are.
And that's where I feel central to my calling is to help tell the story, is to help build that bridge, make it wider, allow the resource to flow to the need both ways. Because I'll never forget my mom saying, now you just be careful what you export. Don't assume because the poor family doesn't have a lot of money that they're not rich in other ways.
Right.
And I have found that to be true. I have gotten in touch with a level of generosity, a level of sacrifice, a level of hope and mercy in the.
And it flows both ways.
It flows both ways. We all have resources. We all have need, and that's just how God invented the church for us to serve each other, and that's how we heal each other.
It's amazing how it flows both ways.
It
how our
does.
Father God does that.
Yeah.
Last question. I could sit for you for hours on just about anything, but definitely on leadership, man. You're gifted in that calling. I've watched you I haven't stalked you, but I sort of kind of have stalked you from afar, Jimmy, for many years, man. How do you see leadership today? And I know we go on forever on this one, but how do you see it playing out today in today's culture and world?
Yeah, I think for me, a lot of people say leadership is influence, and I see why they say that. Influence helps move people from here to there, and a leader does that. I get it. But I think leadership is actually beyond that. Leadership is influence and courage. I can influence you to take Coke instead of Pepsi. Both are known deals. Leadership is taking you from a known place to an unknown place.
It's influence and courage.
Because every time you take people to a new place, that requires courage. And that's what takes influence and turns it into leadership. So that's generally how I think about leadership. The other thing I think about leadership is the fact that sometimes I think that we allow the leadership demands to become heavy and begin destroying our lives. Just the nature of leadership over time. Next year, I'll celebrate my 30th year of being the CEO of an organization. And I can tell you that my number one focus right now is understanding that my most significant contribution to my ministry, to life in the kingdom of heaven, is actually not what I do as a leader, but in fact the person I'm becoming as a leader. And that all of my doing only has real eternal meaning when it is a natural fruit of the person I'm becoming. And any time I get away from that is when I start cutting corners on my soul, and that is always destructive, and it never leads to life. It never leads to life. And that the only way we can sustain being in leadership over the long haul is, in fact, making sure that what we do flows naturally as a fruit of the person we're becoming in Christ, and to never get those two kind of backwards.
It's amazing. I could listen to you all day on this one. And influence and courage.
Yeah.
Well, man, I thank you for your influence. I really do, just on the body of Christ, and your courage to help us lead and serve people well. When I think of compassion, this may sound weird. I don't necessarily think of the kids. Who I mainly think of is us here and what could take place if we were to get involved and get all in.
Absolutely. By the way, we also in our research discovered that in all of our, about 15 funding countries around the world, that there are 184 million Jesus followers who have already exhibited the signs of resonating with a Christ-centered, church-driven, child-focused approach to serving the poor. 184 million
amazing.
Jesus followers, and they live in the top 5 to 10% of wealth in the world. That's why I say the church alone can meet the need of the 170 million children.
And it goes back and forth.
Totally.
Thank you, man.
Bless you,
I
my
appreciate
friend.
it. I wish you
Bless
well
you.
out there on the
Thank
field.
you.
Thank you for what you do.